So let's shift into our trauma responses and start really kind of learning a bit more about them. And I'm sure you already have some basic information, but the reason I feel like this topic is so important is I know with myself, before I really understood trauma, I kind of felt like the trauma responses that I was having and everything that the coping skills that came with them, I confused for me. I thought they were me. They were the new me or the changed me or the damaged me. Because at one point in my life, because of the trauma, it was almost like I became a different person. I couldn't function as the person I was before. At that time, I developed the beliefs like I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, which can only keep us stuck. When in reality, what was happening is my body was now in its trauma responses. So as we learn about this, it gives us that space so that we don't over-identify with our trauma responses, just like we wouldn't do that physically, right? For example, I'm outside and pollen comes in my nose and I sneeze. That's a trauma response. That's a healthy fight response when the body propels something away from you. But I would never say, oh, I'm a sneeze. But if I'm stuck in the fawn response, I'll say, I'm a people pleaser. I'm codependent. I'm this or that. When in reality, it's the same thing. It's a trauma response. So that's the value of really deep diving into this. We start giving ourselves space to notice instead of over identifying with that. So that being said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you feel like you know the real you outside of the trauma? With 1 being, I know myself really well, and 10 being, I know my trauma personality really well, but I don't know myself or the real authentic me really well. So we have 10s, 5s, 1s, 5, 8s. I'm not a sneeze. Thought you guys were like 5s, 6, 7s. I don't know my life outside of trauma. Yes, like that's reality. There was a time I didn't even know who I was anymore because all I was a bunch of collected trauma responses and coping skills. Okay, so let's talk about, well, what does it mean then to have a trauma response? Our trauma responses, whether it's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, they're not conscious decisions. They're not something that we're saying, just like a sneeze. I'm not going to say, oh, you know what? I think I'll sneeze right now. That'll be good for my body. It doesn't happen that way. A sneeze is reflexive. It's automatic. Well, so are our trauma responses. They're reflexive and they're automatic. They're biological responses to something that in our environment seems like a threat. And that can be either a real or a perceived threat. Now, what I mean by real or perceived, because of especially Cptsd and chronic consistent trauma, our nervous system gets confused. So for example, let's say I had a toxic caregiver that was always angry, right? And was either neglectful or abusive. So it could be on either end of the spectrum. And I could see their anger. I experienced what came with that anger. And therefore I developed this belief like that person, I'm not loved. I'm not cared about. I'm not worthy. And when we're children and we have those beliefs, it goes deeper than that. To be a child and feel like I'm unworthy means, well, then who's going to take care of me? And if I'm not taken care of, I can't take care of myself, I can die. So there's a survival factor online, right? So let's say now I'm an adult. That child that grew up like that, I'm an adult and I'm in a relationship and my significant other is angry. Automatically, my nervous system will be like, I'm in danger. I'm not thinking that. But to my nervous system, it's like, that anger in the past meant abuse or neglect. My life is on the line. Therefore, it must mean the same thing again because our nervous system goes to the past and our experiences to define if we're safe in the present. And so if in childhood I developed the trauma response of fawning, I need to make my caregiver happy so that I'm safe, which we often have to do, especially if we had narcissistic parents. We can't fight them. We can't run away. So we wind up fawning. And when we've been living in a fawn response for a long time, it's almost like we're always in that chronic fawning response. And so we lose the ability to notice uncomfortableness with danger. Things we don't like that people do with danger. For example, I had a client last week who's still in a situation with somebody toxic. And she was telling me, if she's working on getting her agency back and really learning to be happy despite this person. But she says she's very afraid. So I asked her, what are you afraid will happen? So she told me, if I'm happy, I'm punished. So I was like, okay, well, what help me to understand like what that means. Like when you're punished, what will happen? I'll feel that negative energy. Okay, when that negative energy comes, what will happen? I just feel it. It's too much. As we peeled it back and she noticed, she goes, oh my goodness, I'm afraid of his negative energies. Like that doesn't make sense. But it does make sense through the lens of childhood trauma because negative energy in childhood is like, who's going to take care of me? I can die. So there's the nuance with trauma when we're adults is that as we're healing, we start realizing how much of the stories that are coming up are because of the past. Does that make sense? Yes or no, if that makes sense so far. Okay, awesome. So that's why I was saying when we first started, like there's nothing wrong with your nervous system, except that sadly, we were born into family systems that programmed our nervous system in a way that keeps us in things like fawning or fight, flee. And that's dangerous because guess who loves people that fawn? Narcissists, toxic people, they love people that fawn because they want everyone fawning all around them. So it's almost like our narcissistic parents set us up to relive it in adulthood until we start changing the programs. So just kind of seeing how that lands so far. Checking in with your body because your body is always listening. What do you notice? Like as you're paying attention, what comes up in 1 or 2 words? The pattern. Yeah, we start seeing the patterns that come up. Power grid can't handle the high electrical pulse of my computer and lights lose power. Okay, that's in response to a brownout. Feels unsafe to not fawn when I can feel the person is unhealthy. Helpful to realize it is a perceived threat. Yes. What is a healthier response instead of fawning? We'll get to that, I promise. So first, we're going to kind of understand it, and then we're going to really start learning how to embody and learn different ways, really help our body to learn that there are options. In childhood, there was no option. Fawning was the safest thing we could do, right? So we're going to learn that there are options. Okay, going back to this thought of real or perceived threat. By the way, when I learned this, this was really, it's like my brain took a while to wrap around it. And it's so funny because when I see my clients, the way she was answering the questions, it's like my brain went, I remember being there. I remember getting help. And I remember I had to hide that I was getting help. Couldn't tell the person that I was going to therapy because I wasn't allowed to heal. Okay. I think some of you might be able to relate to that. But anyway, the person helping me was like, you shouldn't have to hide. Like, this is a normal thing. You shouldn't have to hide this. And I was like, do you know what will happen? And they were like, well, what will happen, Michelle? That person will get angry. And when they're angry, what will they do? I'll probably get the silent treatment, or I'll probably get insulted. I'll probably get shamed. And then what will happen? And I was like, are you kidding? That's enough. That's dangerous. Took me a while to realize that that is unpleasant and nobody likes that. But to my nervous system, it felt like my life was on the line. So it took me a little bit to kind of wrap my head around that. So if that's your case, just kind of know that can be like that. So what's the part of us that's saying my life is on the line? Because I knew consciously I wasn't thinking that. No part of me was saying, oh, I'm going to die. Well, the part of us that's doing that is our neuroception. And that's our nervous system constantly evaluating our environment, looking for cues to determine if a situation or a person is safe. And the cues that it gets, it instantaneously looks at the past. So if we see, let's say somebody angry in our life, someone angry was met with a lot of abuse. We're going to find ourselves very uncomfortable with people that are upset, even when they're not upset with us. Just the energy of somebody being upset, because the nervous system's looking at that, it's remembering the past and it's bringing them together. So that's what the nervous system is always looking at: what's happening now, what happened in the past, what did you do in the past to stay alive? So it's like it's spreading out against everything and evaluating like a monitor. And then when it thinks there's threat, this is where our trauma responses kick on. When it thinks there's threat, we go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and there's a biology to that. It's not just a thought like, oh, I'm in a fight response, I'm in a flee. No, our whole body changes. Adrenaline is running through our veins. Our blood pressure changes. We get hypervigilant. Our eyes darting, our heartbeat changes, our breathing changes, and it can be instantaneously. So I want to explain how this happens physically so we can understand what's happening emotionally. Yes or no in the chat box. If you've ever been driving a car, an animal runs out into the road, you didn't see it, or something runs out into the road and your foot slammed on the brake. Yes or no if you ever had anything similar to that kind of experience. Tell me if this relates or resonates. After that, right, you pull over and you're like, all this energy's here. You call somebody, what just happened? And there's all this energy, right? It's not like, oh, I just almost hit something and I just keep going on my way. There's a biology to that. It's the same thing emotionally. We just don't realize that. So, for example, something happens and our body goes into a fight response. All that activation, that rush comes up in our body. What does it want us to do? Well, it's like a propellant. It wants us to do something depending on what it thinks is best. So, for example, if it thinks you're in danger and you can propel outwards and be safe, you can fight and win, you're going to go into a fight response and you're going to have energy to push out. For example, somebody throws a ball at me. That's a fight response. I get sick. My body propels out. That's a fight response. We always think of fight like aggressive, but it's really just energy propelling you, like something's in my boundary. Flight response is propelling you to lead, to run. The problem, those are our first go-to, but the problem is most of us in childhood, we couldn't fight and we couldn't flee. So freeze comes on top, which means we have a thwarted fight and a thwarted flight response. So I'm going to explain what that looks like. And as I go through like the next list of what it looks like, I really want you to kind of think about your life and maybe jot down on a piece of paper which one resonates most with you. And it might be that, oh, with my family, I'm in this. At work, I'm with that, right? Just really bringing it into your awareness because that's the first step. So if in childhood, we wanted to fight because things that were happening were wrong, but we couldn't. Again, that activation wants to propel us to kind of propel us out and away. And if we're living in that stuck energy, you might find a lot of tension in your jaw because even screaming is a fight response. Calling for help is a fight response. It's like propelling, right? Something away from you or to get help. So you also, when you're talking, you might have like, it might feel like there's somebody's hand around your throat when you're speaking your truth. You might feel like this lump in your throat. You might also, again, fight response is our upper body. So you might have clenched fists a lot or tension in your muscles and your shoulders. You're like holding everything down. So just noticing that could possibly be a thwarted fight response. And what I mean by thwarted, when our body wanted to fight but couldn't, all that activation, like remember with the car and you like slam on the brake, all that activation in the body stays in your body. It's still there. And then we have like years of all that activation. And so another way that or another symptom of a thwarted fight response is we might be very easily provoked to rage because there's so much fight that we have stifled down. We could also be, if we don't have rage, it might be like low-grade irritability all the time. So just kind of thinking about your life, thinking if that resonates. A thwarted flight response. Our nervous system, if it says, okay, fighting's not going to work, let's get out of here. It propels you to leave. So it affects like your lower body. So for example, if we weren't able to flee because we couldn't run away, right? We might have, I know with myself, once I learned this, I was like, oh my goodness, all my friends used to make fun of me in middle school and high school. My leg was always going, always jittering, sewing machine leg or whatever it's called. That's often a thwarted flight response. I couldn't leave, but the energy to leave is there. It's always there. And so sometimes how that shows up is that we might be someone that starts overworking, overdoing. We're the kind of person that we have like schedules and we do everything. We do so much that we don't have a moment to ourselves because we're fleeing any discomfort in our feelings or in our body. Another way it comes out is talking really fast. I've done this. Oh, it's like I detach from myself and I watch myself. I'm like, doing all these words coming out. There's no feeling there. I'm so disconnected from my body. Well, that's a flight response, trying to run away from our sensation. We're not feeling what we're saying. We're not present in our body when we do that, right? Some ways that it shows up in our behaviors is we might end things fast across the board. So for example, it could be anytime a relationship gets challenging, and I'm not talking about toxic relationships. I'm talking about any relationship because no relationship is perfect, right? There's rupture and repair in every relationship. But anytime there's something challenging and there is a rupture, if we have a stuck flight response, we end it. We might burn that bridge. It could be in romantic relationships. It could be changing jobs. It could be friends, but it's like we're always fleeing from the challenge of the rupture, right? And so we'll feel a lot of energy sensationally from the waist down. So, for example, you might get a lot of pain in your pelvis, in your hips, right? They say the junk drawer of our emotions. If we have a lot of flight energy, we have some tight hips, our thighs, we might have joint problems in our ankles, in our knees, or we sense a lot of energy there. So, just kind of reflecting, like, do I notice that? And then we'll go on to freeze. So, when it comes to freeze has a lot less agency than fight or flight, because at least with fight or flight, the energy is doing something, right? But with freeze, it's almost like all that activation is the propellant, instead of going out, is propelled inward. It's like we're like made of stone from the inside out. And this is something that animals do. In fact, Peter Levine, who started somatic experiencing, one of the things he learned, or the way he started his program with somatic experiencing, was learning about the nervous system of animals. So, for example, let's say there's a gazelle. I always use this one. I don't know why. I got to change my animals at some point. But anyway, a gazelle is running away from the lion, and the lion catches up with it, right? It's got it in its mouth. Forgive the graphic picture in the mind. The gazelle goes limp. It looks like it's dead. So the lion puts it down to go get its family. And guess what the gazelle does? Jumps up, takes off. And guess what? That gazelle is not traumatized. That gazelle doesn't live the rest of its life looking over its shoulder or scared or petrified. It's as if it never happened. And the reason Peter Levine discovered was because the freeze response is supposed to be temporary. It's supposed to help us if we can't fight, we can't flee, we stop, hope the problem leaves. But as soon as it leaves, we come out and we get to activate whatever energy is there. So the gazelle shakes, runs, and that energy is discharged. People, we don't do that, right? We go into freeze, we constrict down. And for a lot of us, we never come out. And that's why it's like the trauma, an animal can go through trauma and not be traumatized, but we can go through even emotional trauma and feel traumatized. And so again, where the propellant is causing us to put all of that on the inside, stifling our fight flight energy. So this could lead to depression or depressing states, right? Because it's almost like we can't feel anything. We're constantly stuck. We have this thought that something bad is going to happen. And so we live in 24/7 bracing. And some of the behaviors that can come up with freeze is we might make a list of things to do. We might set goals, but we just can't get to that, right? It's almost like stuck freeze energy makes us feel like we're unable to mobilize even to do just everyday tasks. I remember standing in my kitchen when I was like in the thick of it and thinking I have to do the dishes and feeling like I had to walk through a minefield just to do the dishes, because that freeze energy just makes you feel like everything is overwhelming. So just thinking about that, jotting down where in your life, what area of life you might see that, just having curiosity without judgment. And then the last one I'm going to mention is the last trauma response is fawn. It's the last go-to of our nervous system. It's like, I can't fight. I can't flee. Playing dead's going to get me killed. This is not going to work. I need to fawn. I need to make this other person happy so that I'm safe, right? Almost like you think of, let's say I'm in an alley and there's like a wall behind me and this dangerous animal comes and I can't fight this animal. I'm going to lose. I have nowhere to run. If I freeze, it's going to kill me. So what do I do? It's okay. You're okay. Trying to calm the animal, right? That's a fawn response. We see it in the animal world as well. When I used to take, well, I still take, but when Luke's dog was a puppy and I used to take it to the dog park, because she's different now. She's a bit of a fighter, but when she was a puppy, I would take her and she was really small. These big dogs would come running to her. She'd flop on her back and give her belly. She'd be fawning. I'm going to make you happy. Look, I'm not a threat. That's the fawn response. And the fawn response always has freeze energy to it, because what we really want to do, we don't feel safe to do. So that piece of us freezes. And then we're pushed to propel to socially engage in a way that goes against who we really are. So it's a hybrid response of freeze and fawn. Our authenticity freezes and then we pacify. So those are the 4 trauma responses, how they kind of show up. So I'm curious, like I'm going to pause, and this is an opportunity to popcorn share whatever came up for you. Just taking like, it could be a couple of words, it could be a sentence. And there's no judgment and there's no right or wrong. I'm just curious, like as you're hearing this, what came up for you? So I'll mute myself and we'll give it like 60 to 90 seconds or 2 minutes.
I wanted to share that I've been stuck in chronic freeze for so long, and I always thought that that was who I was. I thought I was lazy. I didn't get things done on time. I was stupid and incapable. And I can't tell you how freeing it is to know that that's not me. I just needed help with understanding this and how to get out of it. So, yeah, I'm happy because of that.
For me, I think it helps me to have compassion for myself and the judgments I've had over me. It makes me understand more, my responses after all that I've been through in the past.
Passion and freeing. How awesome. Yeah, that's the whole point of what we're learning. When we start self condemning ourselves for our body doing what it's programmed to do, we get to let go of that. We stop hurting ourselves. We start learning how to support ourselves. That's what we want to do. So at the same time, that was a lot of information. So I'm curious, like on a scale of 1 to 10, with activation being present right now, with 10 being a lot of activation, 1 not at all, what are you noticing in your body? Let me know in the chat box. We have 8, 5, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. Breathing, self support, 7, tight hips, painful. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. The body's always listening. And when something hits close to home, it's like a tuning fork, right? You hit a tuning fork, and if it's a different tuning fork with a different frequency, it does nothing. But when it's the same frequency, it starts pinging. So as your body's listening to all these things that it knows it's doing, and maybe it thought it was doing it outside of your conscious awareness, and you're like looking at it, it's like, you're looking at me. So I'm going to move into an exercise that just is really helpful. It's a great exercise for learning how to support the activation that's there.